Alright, so now let's look at how we might trace through a for loop by hand. And so this would just be how we would trace through without using MATLAB. And we still want to do the same thing, we're just going to do it using pencil and paper instead of printfs. So again, the first step is to look at what variables we're going to worry about here. And so I and sum are the values that change on the iterations of our loop. So we'd want to look at the values that I and sum take on as we go through our loop. So the first thing we can do is we can kind of expand out this range here for I. We can say, well, the values that I is going to take on are 4, plus 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. Okay. So we would expect to do 4 iterations of this loop, one for each of the values that I can take on. Then we can just say, well, let's trace through. Let's look at the values that I takes on each iteration of our loop, and then let's also look at the values that sum takes on each iteration of our loop. So in the first iteration of our loop, I is going to be 4. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to use 4. And we know from up here that sum gets initialized to 0. So we would do an iteration of our loop with 4, right, for I, and sum with its initial value of 0. And what we do inside our loop is we say sum equals sum plus I. So we'll go get the current value of sum, which is 0, add the current value of I, which is 4, to get a new value for sum, which is 4. Okay, that's the end of this iteration of the loop, so we'll go back up and we'll take the next value, 6, from our range. So now I is going to be 6. And we'll do another iteration of our loop here with I equal to 6. So we'll say sum, the current value of sum is 4, plus the current value of I, which is 6, is 10. So we're going to make sum equal to 10. That's the end of this iteration of the loop, so we'll come back up and we'll take the next value from our range, which is 8. So now I is going to be equal to 8. We'll come in, we'll do an iteration of our loop, sum equals sum plus I. The current sum is 10 and I is 8, so we'll update sum to be 18. Again, the end of this iteration, so we'll come back up and get the next value from our range, which is 10. So now I is going to be equal to 10. We'll do sum equals sum plus I. The current value of sum is 18, plus 10 is 28. That's the end of this iteration, so we'll come back up and we'll realize that we're actually out of values in our range. So we're done with our for loop. We'll come down to the end here and we'll continue with the rest of our script. So we would just output the final sum is, and we would fill in the value of sum, which is 28.